So I'd like to thank the SBIA organizing committee and Captain Stoddart and Commander Ford for the introduction and the invitation to come to speak to you all today. I also thank you all in the room and also online for attending this really great event. So with that, I am a ORA, so Office of Regulatory Affairs field investigator. So I can potentially actually show up at your facility. And so I'm up out of the Stoneham, Massachusetts office, which is about 20 minutes up the road. And so just by a quick show of hands, how many people have been through an FDA inspection? Okay, so quite a few of you. So the thing about FDA inspections are they can cause what I call SEMs, or severe emotional moments. And so this is typically because we don't pre-announce, so we just show up. And so my goal today is, through my presentation, is to give you some information about the pre-approval inspection process and the program so that you can minimize your severe emotional moments when I show up at your facility. So with that, some of the information that I'll present are from my experiences as a field investigator, so they're my views and opinions and don't necessarily reflect the views of the agency. So I just put that disclaimer out there. So my learning objective for today and for the audience is to provide useful information regarding the drug pre-approval process and specifically dealing with inspections. So I'm just going to pose this challenge question to you, and so I hope you take this away from the presentation today in that, so what I'm posing to you or challenging you is to take one thing away from the material presented today so that you can have a successful, the key phrase is successful pre-approval inspection. Nobody wants to have a non-successful or a horrible inspection because, again, those lead to the severe emotional moments. So the agenda, what I'll talk about is the overall pre-approval process and how pre-approval inspections actually fit into that process. Pre-approval inspections are actually conducted against objectives. And so currently there are 3 official objectives that I'll go over, and there's a 4th in the works, which I'll highlight what it is. So I'll go over the pre-approval inspections. And as far as the actual pre-approval inspection itself, I'll go over the dues, or some of the things that, as the investigators at the facility, we like to see or are required to look at when we're actually conducting the inspection. So the dues, us being humans, we're great at learning from previous mistakes. And so what I'm going to highlight to you are some issues to avoid, or the don'ts. And so with that, I'll present 2 case studies that highlight some of the issues that arise when analyzing the objectives for a pre-approval inspection. So the first thing is the pre-approval inspection process. So what is a pre-approval inspection? So a pre-approval inspection is performed in order to determine that a manufacturing facility or firm is capable of manufacturing a drug, so capable of commercially manufacturing a drug product, and that the data that are submitted in the application, the NDA, the BLA, are accurate and complete. And so we're really there to show up and assess whether you're ready for commercial manufacture or not. And so for the pre-approval process, it really starts with, Bala was talking about submission of this Form FDA 356H, which is the application to market drug product. And so within that, on the screen I'm showing on the right-hand side, that's some of the excerpts from this 356H form. And so under Section 28, there's actually an establishment information section where all of the facilities that are performing some sort of commercial function for the drug product manufacturer must be listed in there. And there's a specific question which is highlighted in that section, and it says, is the site ready for inspection? And so when you submit this 356H form, and if you check yes, then the site should be ready for inspection. You would do a huge disservice to yourself or your contract testing laboratories or contract manufacturers if you check yes and they're not ready. So it's essentially throwing them under the bus, so don't do that. So all sites listed in the application are required to be evaluated in some way, shape, or form, whether that's a paper review from previous inspectional history, or an on-site pre-approval inspection. So with that, not all sites that are listed in the 356H form require an inspection, and so what I'll do is talk about in the next few slides what warrants or what triggers a pre-approval inspection. So there's a system that is designed on a risk-based approach to determine which facilities actually require pre-approval inspection. And so previously, there was this old model where the system was based around these, what they call PAI triggers, or pre-approval inspection triggers. And so previously, when drug applications were submitted, if any of these trigger criteria were noted during review of the application, then it could essentially trigger a pre-approval inspection. And so some of the older trigger criteria include if it was the first ever application filed by the applicant, so that would trigger a pre-approval inspection. For first inspection for an establishment, so if an establishment has never been inspected, so FDA likes to go in and establish the history and make sure that the establishment is complying with good manufacturing practices. Previously, new molecular entities, so if they are new molecular entities for a class and new to FDA, then they would trigger a pre-approval inspection. For facilities that are listed in the application in which the manufacturing process is substantially different from what the facility is used to making, that would trigger an inspection. So, for example, if a firm is listed as a tablet manufacturer and they've been making tablets for years, then all of a sudden we get an application for a sterile injectable product, that would throw up flags because they're used to them making tablets. So the other thing that can trigger a pre-approval inspection in the old model is if the new process that is brought in for the drug manufacturing, it poses significant facility concerns. So if a firm actually has to build a new facility or a substantial addition or filling line or tableting line, then that could be a flag because we would want to evaluate that before approving the application. And one of the other ones that would trigger a pre-approval inspection in the old model was the first generic to market. So now FDA has revised the way that pre-approval inspections are, I guess, determined whether or not they're needed. And so this is termed the Integrated Quality Assessment Model. And so this model was developed through experience with the drug application review process, so NDA, BLA review process. And so now the pre-approval inspection criteria and related profile processes are used differently. So the trigger criteria that were listed on the previous slide, now not all of them automatically trigger an inspection. And so what they are used for is this more of a holistic evaluation of the facility and the process risk. And so the final determination for if a pre-approval inspection is actually needed is based on the overall assessment of a firm or facility. And so some of the things that are considered during this review are proposed operations and known site capability, process complexity and product-specific risks, the development and scale-up risks, previous experience qualifying and maintaining processes, manufacturing processes. If during review of the application there are data integrity concerns, and I'll cover data integrity later on in the talk, but if during review of the application there are significant data integrity concerns or there's a history of data integrity issues at a firm or facility, that can automatically contribute to this IQA model. And then also a firm's process control strategy and what risk mitigation steps they're implementing. So if FDA receives an application and there's no control strategy, and that's a pretty concerning thing. So how that all works is when a firm submits an application for review. So what happens is that application is received by the Office of Process and Facilities along with the other review divisions. And the IQA team, so the Integrated Quality Assessment team, assesses the application in concurrence with OPF. And so they'll actually determine whether or not a pre-approval inspection is needed. And so they'll ask the question, is it needed or is it not? And since this talk is about pre-approval inspections, of course, I'm going to cover the yes option. And so once it's determined that a pre-approval inspection is needed, the IQA team and office and process facility reviewers will actually work together to develop inspection strategy. So they'll come up with things that they want to review during the inspection, concerns that they have, yeah, so essentially what they want to cover and ensure is adequate during the pre-approval inspection. And so for specifically small molecules, typically Office of Regulatory Affairs will be the lead investigator. So you'll have a lead investigator from ORA, and then subject matter experts from CDER will typically attend and help with the inspection. Sometimes they just send one person from ORA. So it's variable. When people show up at your facility to conduct an inspection, you may get one of us, you may get a whole room of us. So it's just be prepared, be flexible. So ORA typically will schedule the pre-approval inspection. So what I mean by scheduling is they'll work with OPF and CDER to determine, the time frame when it needs to be completed within the review cycle, target dates. And again, for small molecule, typically they're not announced. So again, we'll just show up at your inspection. So you'll have a general idea because you would have submitted your application, and you'll, just waiting anxiously. FDA is going to show up eventually, but typically unannounced. And so when we actually show up to do the inspection, we'll cover the objectives, which I'll go over, and at the end of the inspection, if there are any deficiencies that we've noted, they're listed on, it's called a Form FDA 43, so it's a list of objectionable conditions. And then during the closeout meeting at the inspection, so during the inspection you should have daily communications with the investigation team. Then at the closeout of the inspection, if you get a 483, or if you don't get a 483, regardless, a recommendation should be communicated to the firm whether or not how the investigators are going to classify the inspection, and whether it's going to be a approve recommendation or withhold recommendation. We go back to the office after the inspection and write the reports. And then so the inspection report and the 43 and the firm responses are ultimately passed off back to office process facilities and the IQA team, which they evaluate the 43 responses and the significance of the deficiencies. And then ultimately the facility assessment is made where, in addition to, I forgot to mention, once OPF receives the 43 in the inspection report, they can choose to send out additional information requests or request documents. So that's another thing to consider is even after the inspection, you may get additional communication from FDA on clarification or a document request. But ultimately, at the end of this process, what is made is a recommendation as far as the facility is concerned on whether to approve the application based on a facility risk or withhold, which is the complete response. So I'd like to highlight some reasons why PAIs are not performed. So again, if during this IQA risk assessment, facility assessment, if none of the criteria are met, so there are no flags that are raised or risks that are deemed too significant not to be covered with the pre-approval inspection, the PAI could be waived. So basically, we never come out to your facility. We just do the paper review of the facility information in the application. The other second reason of why a pre-approval inspection could not be conducted or waived is that if for some reason you're making a commercial product and you've had a really bad inspection previously, and FDA is pursuing regulatory actions, so such as issuance of a warning letter or a really bad injunction, and even if you submit an application, FDA can say we're not going to review this because you're not in compliance with the laws and regulation. And then the last one I'll note is if on that 356H form, if you check that the facility is not ready, we're not going to come out. So again, if you check yes, great, we'll come out and be ready. So So the overall outcome, again, of a pre-approval inspection is a recommendation. Recommendations are made during that closeout meeting with the firm. And again, they are just that. It's just a recommendation. So these are recommendations made by myself and my colleagues in the inspection team to my management, and it's ultimately passed on to CDER or whatever office is reviewing your application, and that office has the ultimate authority of either approving or withholding applications. So that's an important note to make. The recommendations that are made during the conclusion of the inspection, so there's 3 of them. So there's the classification system for an inspection is NAI, is no action indicated. VAI is voluntary action indicated. And OAI is official action indicated. And so those correspond to the recommended classification of the inspection. So typically, when an investigator will recommend approval, the inspection is classified as NAI or VAI. So that means that either there were no significant deficiencies noted during the inspection, or there were some, but we feel that the firm is capable of addressing the problems themselves. And so if a 43 is issued, the response to the 43 deficiencies is important. So take that into consideration. If the inspection goes south and is really bad, then the investigator will recommend that the inspection be classified as official action indicated. So that means they are recommending the FDA take regulatory action. And in the case of a pre-approval inspection, that would be withholding the application or not approving it. So some of the reasons you could get a withhold recommendation are observe that the site is not CGMP compliant, so C is current good manufacturing practice compliant, or that the information in the CMC section of the application is not consistent with what's actually on the site. So if the inspection is classified as OAI, then the responses to the 43 are critical to respond to them. So again, the recommendations should be discussed during the closeout of the inspection. So if they don't mention it, you should ask, how do you propose that the inspection is going to be classified? So the actual objectives, so what's actually covered during the inspection, again, pre-approval inspections are based on objective-based. And so what we assess is there's 3 objectives. 1 is readiness for commercial manufacture. 2 is the conformance to the submitted application. 3 is data integrity. And all throughout covering these objectives, we also will cover your adherence to CGMP, or current good manufacturing practice. So for the objective 1, readiness for commercial manufacture, so the big thing about objective 1 is the investigator will determine whether your firm has a quality system that is designed and can have appropriate control and oversight of your proposed commercial manufacturing process. We'll evaluate your overall CGMP compliance as it relates to the application product or the proposed commercial product. And then we'll evaluate your specific pre-approval product processes. So some of the things that we'll ask and assess are, is your facility adequate for the proposed commercial manufacturing process? Is it the facility is appropriately qualified? Is your equipment appropriately qualified? Water systems. The other thing we'll assess is there evidence or data that you have on site that you can show us during the inspection that shows that you are capable of manufacturing your proposed product at the commercial scale? And does it meet the proposed specifications? And so some of the things we review are development data from research and development batches and pharmaceutical development information. We'll review master batch records, manufacturing instructions, and SOPs. And so as far as the quality system, the things that we look at are change controls to ensure that you're effectively and adequately controlling change, deviations, and trends relating to the development process. Some of the other things that are evaluated for Objective 1 is we'll evaluate your sampling plans, so your in-process sampling plans, your raw material sampling plans, testing of components and products. We want to make sure you had an adequate supplier qualification program. We'll We'll evaluate your facility and equipment procedures and focus on contamination controls, especially if it's a facility that's manufacturing multiple products. Evaluate the quality system. So do you have a system in place for batch release, batch disposition decisions? Is everything routed through quality for ultimate approval and disposition? How a facility or firm handles discrepancy management. So when something goes wrong, how is that documented, investigated, and is a root cause determined? We'll look at investigation completeness, so investigation into deviations out of specification results. Complaint and adverse event handling will ensure that you actually have a system in place to receive, process, investigate, and handle complaints and report adverse reactions, adverse events. We love to get into the laboratory and look at raw data, SOPs. We'll actually watch people conduct testing in manufacturing operations. So if you're at a firm and one thing to prepare your operators are for is FDA will sit there and watch you for hours. You're like, go away, FDA. But what we do is we like to watch for an extended period of time. So what we'll do is when you first start watching people, they're on their best behavior. But if you just sit back and you watch them, they kind of forget that you're in the room. And so they'll fall into their normal behavior. So one of the things that we'll assess is, are you following your own procedures after you forget that FDA is in the room? We'll evaluate that test methods are adequately validated, and if you have any transfer studies that they were appropriate and your methods, analytical methods, are suitable for use. So Objective 2, which is conformance to the submitted application. So what we do when we assess Objective 2 is we actually look at the manufacturing processing lines to ensure that they're consistent. So is the manufacturing equipment that's actually on site at the facility, is that the same as what's in the application? We'll look at executed batch records to see if what was in the executed batch records, does that match what is in the submission? We'll review laboratory methods to make sure that they're consistent with the submitted application. So sometimes we come across firms running different methods than what's in the application, which is a no-no. We'll ensure that active pharmaceutical ingredient suppliers and vendors are properly presented in the application. So where you're getting your active pharmaceutical ingredients, APIs, is it really what's actually happening on site versus what you say in the application? We'll review biobatch and registration executed batch records and assess comparability with the commercial scale process. So those two should be the same, or you should have data to support that you can manufacture at the commercial scale process. And then we'll also evaluate any unreported batches or test results for contextual data integrity. So when FDA comes to do a pre-approval inspection, we're not just going to look at the successful batches. We also want to see what went wrong, right, and how you dealt with those issues. So we'll look at rejected and failed batches. And then Objective 3, which is data integrity audit. So this is where the investigator will actually go into the laboratory. They'll go and audit raw data on chromatography systems, so source data to look at audit trails. We'll go through the trash. We love to go through the trash and look for discarded GMP documents. For microbiological plates, we love to go through the trash and look for plates with colonies, because then we'll cross-reference the records with what's on the plates. And so recycling bins, trash receptacles are fair game for us. So I guess the moral is take your trash out. So for data integrity, retention of GMP data is a requirement. And one of the things to remember for data integrity is, the one thing to remember is that it should be ALCOA. So the government loves acronyms. And so, of course, for data integrity, we've created one. So for data integrity, if you remember, the important thing is data should be attributable. So it should be you should be able to attribute to a specific process or manufacturing step. It should be legible. So I've come across records that I could not read, which is not a good thing, because if I can't read them, then I don't know how the firm can read them. It should be contemporaneously recorded. So For batch records or laboratory records, they should be filled out as the test or as the manufacturing step is completed, not weeks after the batch has already been made. And then that's not the time to fill out batch records. It should be original, and you should have the true copy of it. And then it should be accurate. And so some of the things we look for data integrity are the control and security of raw data. So if you're collecting data on computers like HPLC, instrument controllers, or manufacturing equipment controllers, are those computers secure? Are they restricted to required personnel only? And who has the administrative privileges to edit or potentially change raw data? Employee accountability. So this is another thing that we look at. So what we try to ensure is that we'll look at manufacturing records, and we'll look through who signs off on significant manufacturing steps. And we'll actually go and cross-check to see if that employee was working that day through badge access records. So if you have a batch record and it says that somebody's supposed to be conducting the mixing step for your manufacturing process, but then they are on vacation and sitting on a beach in Cancun, then there's like a disconnect. That's a data integrity issue. So we'll review raw data from biobatch, stability batches, and laboratory testing. We'll review inventory records, equipment logs, so to see if the equipment was actually used on the day that it said it was used in the manner that it was intended to be used. We'll look for passing data submitted instead of failing data, which is a big data integrity concern. The other one is improper invalidation of out-of-specification results, OOSs. And then, again, exclusion of specific lots from the stability program or the application to avoid submitting failing data. So the next thing I'll talk about is the do's. So these are the things that you should do to prepare for the pre-approval inspection. So the biggest one is, on the top bullet, is be flexible. So FDA inspections are fluid. So you never know where the investigating team is going to go. So you just have to be flexible, be fluid. And remember, we're people too, so we have our own personalities and quirks and sense of humor. So work with us. We're there to work with you and conduct the best inspection possible. So be flexible and be prepared. So when we show up to conduct the pre-approval inspection, that should not be the first time that your firm is actually going through the inspection process. So one of the things that you can do to be prepared for an inspection is conduct mock inspections. So practice how your document will flow. So once something is requested by FDA, how is your firm going to obtain the original records and present it to the investigator? So that should all be worked out before the inspection. Understand your manufacturing process, so that's very important. Understand any issues that arise during pharmaceutical development and address them appropriately if there are issues. Have all your required equipment and facilities, and then ensure equipment and facilities are clean, orally qualified, and have the required documents. And so the next few slides are just some of the documents that we'll typically look at during a pre-approval inspection. So I'll just highlight some of those. So for product process development, we'll look at product development reports, tech transfer reports, and summaries. We'll look at if you've conducted process performance qualification, the protocols and the reports if you have them, validation master plans, specifications, test methods, manufacturing flow charts, raw data that supports pharmaceutical development, and then for analytical method validation plans, protocols, and reports. For quality function documents, we'll look at deviations. Again, whatever they're called, deviations, non-conformances, variances, oopsies, whatever they're called, we'll look at them. We typically like to have a list of all batches manufactured to include reject, rework, and reprocess. Again, that gives us a whole holistic picture to look at to see if you're capable and ready to manufacture at the commercial scale. Change controls, CAPAs, complaints, OSs, and then procedures that govern all of these processes, so investigations, complaints, etc. Other PAI documents that are typically looked at are facility layout, equipment diagrams, equipment lists, equipment qualification records. So those include the IQ, OQ, PQ, so that's installation qualification, operational qualification, and performance qualification. So we just want to make sure you have the equipment that's listed in the application and it actually works as it was intended to. Maintenance records, schedules, we'll look at batch records, cleaning records, procedures, and validation reports. And then we'd like to have manufacturing laboratory schedules, because then we can sit there and pick what we're going to look at during the inspection. And then complete product list. So the don'ts. So these are some things you shouldn't do during a pre-approval or preparing for a pre-approval inspection. So the don'ts would be reasons why the investigator or investigative team have, at the end of the inspection, will recommend a withhold. So some of the things that will result in a withhold recommendation, so if there are serious CGMP concerns, so if we walk into the facility and it's filthy, so it's insanitary, that's an automatic reason or an issue to say this is gross. It shouldn't be insanitary. There's no other way to say it. I'm sorry. Or another reason, a GMP concern would be the potential for cross-contamination. So if it's a multiple product facility and there's obvious cross-contamination issues, that can be a reason for a GMP concern. Or if the firm is not following their own procedures, a lot of times firms will not follow their own procedures, so that's a GMP violation. And we'll note that. So if there are any significant differences between the process used for the pivotal clinical trial batches and the NDA submission batch, inadequate process control strategy, inadequate process understanding, failure to report adverse findings or failing test data, significant failures related to stability studies. If you have not completed method validation, analytical method validation, that can be a major concern. If you have missing equipment, so if we show up to your facility and you say, oh, our mixer is in the application and it's on order, it's coming. Well, it's not physically at your facility. You do not have it. You're not ready for commercial manufacture. That will make the inspection very short. I'll write it in my notes and I'll leave. That'll be a withhold recommendation. So have all the equipment that you list in your application. Significant data integrity problems and then deviations from the submitted application. So some data integrity concerns that we'll look at that will result in withhold recommendations are falsified data. If quality assurance is approving data that's incomplete or erroneous, that's a data integrity concern. If for some reason there are changes in specification, so you start to manufacturing your product, but it won't meet specification for some reason, and you just widen the specifications, that's not appropriate. Testing into compliance, so if you can't get a passing result and you just repeat the testing without justification to get a passing result, that's frowned upon. Again, if passing data is submitted in the application instead of failing data, that's a concern. And then exclusion of specific lots from the stability program or the application, again, is another reason for potential withhold. So I'm going to present two case studies which kind of highlight all of the things that I've talked about. These are semi-hypothetical, so I'll just leave it at that. So what I'll do is set up the scenario, what the takeaways were, what went wrong, and what happened, or what was the ultimate recommendation. So the first scenario I have is a firm that manufactures tablets. And the tablet manufacturing process includes wet granulation, tableting, and enteric coating. So during the inspection, it was revealed that the several batches failed dissolution. However, the data wasn't reported to FDA in the filing. And so during review of the investigations into these failing results, the firm attributed the core tablet process, the enteric coating process, and the compression of core tablets as the root cause. So they basically blamed every single thing that they had going on for them without an explanation. And so during the inspection, the firm actually hypothesized to FDA that the root cause was this enteric coating step in the coaters, and that there's a dew point issue with the coating process. However, it turned out that their coaters you couldn't even control for dew point. So that was problematic. And the other thing was that the tableting process for this firm, they could only get the tablet press to work when the vendor was there. So when the vendor would leave, it would stop working. So they actually, hypothetically, this firm needed the vendor to come out every time they wanted to manufacture a batch, which is highly problematic. So what would be the recommendation of this? So if I was at this facility, I would recommend withhold. So this would be a failure to report failing data because they had failed dissolution batches that they excluded from the submission. And then ultimately, they don't understand their process because they're having all this variability, but they don't really know what the root cause is. So what happened? So the different batches they manufacture would require different tablet press settings. The firm had no idea why. They had failed dissolution release testing, and they didn't have a root cause. They did not report any of this to FDA. Again, they attributed their problems to the lack of, or the dew point within the coders. However, they didn't have a way of controlling this because their coders, actually, you couldn't control dew point. So ultimately, they had a lack of process understanding. And ultimately, there's no assurance that the finished product that this firm was making would consistently meet finished product specifications. And so takeaways from this example is, if you're doing pharmaceutical development and you start having deviations or failed batches, you should understand why, and you should fully investigate them before you submit the application, or especially before FDA shows up. You should have a sound understanding of what went wrong and why. You should also have somebody that's responsible for overseeing this process so that they can speak to it during the inspection. So process design must be completed and adequate prior to the inspection. And so ultimately, if you run into these issues during product development, you can utilize this information in the investigation and root cause analysis to actually implement a stronger process control strategy. That's the takeaway. So the second case study I have is a firm that was manufacturing drug substance. And so during the pre-approval inspection, it was determined that so this long-term storage of this drug substance they had proposed in the application, low-density polyethylene bags, LDPE. But during the inspection, it was determined that the firm was actually doing stability studies in brown amber bottles and then storing their drug substance in LDPE bags. So they had stability data in brown amber bottles, but they were doing long-term storage in LDPE bags. So the disconnect is you should have stability data in the same container closure as you were storing your drug substance. So the firm lacked data for the qualification of the proposed container closure system. So the recommendation from this inspection would be withhold for failure to meet application commitments. So they said they were going to use LDPE bags in the application. They should use LDPE bags for stability and long-term storage. So this is an example that can come up between a sponsor and like a contract manufacturing organization, because if the commitments and requirements aren't adequately communicated back and forth between the two companies, then there can be miscommunications and ultimately withhold recommendation. So ultimately, the firm was unaware of the commitments and requirements that they had put forth in the submitted application. I think one of the response was that they would store the drug product in brown amber bottles until they collected stability data in LDPE bags. That's not appropriate because FDA, again, you checked yes on the 356H form, so you were ready for inspection. So even though you propose a corrective action, it should have been addressed before the pre-approval inspection. So the takeaway for this is know your commitments and be prepared for the inspection. So with that, I have some resources for industry, so for you all. So one of the best things to look at is what we base our inspection strategy on are the Compliance Program Guidance Manuals, CPGMs. And so this is the one listed on the top bullet is for pre-approval inspections. So that will list all of the things that we'll cover during the pre-approval inspections and potential reasons for withhold recommendations. The other thing are the FDA guidance for industries, the quality system approach to pharmaceutical GMP regulations is a good one. And the other ones that I'll direct you to are product-specific FDA guidances and ICH guidances. So with that, I'd like to just thank my management for allowing me to come out and talk. Again, the REdI Boston organizing staff, and then some review members from CDER that helped me with the slides and reviewing the material. So with that, I hope that so the New England area is a small world. So you all are I hope to see you all at a pre-approval inspection and that you're bringing your product to market. And with that, I hope from this you can take away that you're going to have a successful pre-approval inspection so that we can have a minimization of severe emotional moments. So with that, best of luck with your products and your commercialization. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. We're actually going to run Q&A a little bit differently. Everybody who's coming up the microphones right now, you're just going to wait 5 minutes, and then you're going to figure out where Sean's going to be located for the one-on-ones in 5 minutes and address the questions there. I'm going to use the minute that we have left. Can I get just one online question, please? I'm not letting you off that easy. Sorry.
Are there mutual recognition agreements between FDA and MHRA or other regulatory bodies for foreign inspections, or do they just apply for inspections in their respective territories or other joint inspections?
So I believe that FDA and the European regulators, they're working towards the system of mutual recognition agreements. I know that's still in the process, but I've been on joint inspection with European regulators where they're trying to harmonize what we're looking at. And so I know the ultimate goal is working towards that.
Okay. And I did get in one online question. I apologize to all of you online who submitted those questions. We'll share information in just a little bit about where we can resubmit them. For those of you in the room, Sean will be here in about 5 minutes to answer your questions. But right now, help me thank Sean.